Welcome to the Facilitators Deep Dive Podcast, your podcast on your way to facilitation mastery.
Hey everybody, welcome back. We're going to do a deep dive today into a book that has been getting a lot of buzz, The Art and Science of Facilitation. It's been praised by folks like Lisa Adkins, one of the authors of the Agile Manifesto, and the authors of Difficult Conversations as well. And it's got a really practical approach to facilitation and how it's both an art and a science.
And, I think one of the things that's so interesting about this book is that it jumps right in to sort of a problem that we all face, which is meeting fatigue.
Right.
Like, how often do your meetings, actually get things done?
Oh my gosh, such a good question. And I used to think that having, really long meetings meant we were being super productive.
Right.
But this book kind of busts that myth and calls out what they call collaboration theater, which I think we've all experienced, where you're having lots of conversation, but not a lot of progress.
Right. So this is where I think the whole concept of collective intelligence comes in.
Yeah.
So it's really about how do you tap into, the group's combined knowledge and use that to make decisions, come up with innovative ideas, and get that alignment and commitment.
So it's not just about having a meeting, it's about having an effective meeting.
Totally.
And facilitation is the key. And I have to admit, when I thought about facilitation in the past, I was thinking about, sticky notes and whiteboards and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But this book shows it's really like a total mind shift.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
And they dismantle that old hero leader image, where the leader is like charging ahead and everyone's sort of following them blindly.
Oh, yeah.
It's like that doesn't really work anymore.
Yeah, that image feels very old school. And speaking of old school thinking, the book calls out some really common beliefs that are actually preventing us from having truly collaborative meetings.
You like that sense of we're always rushed. We don't have time for this. Or, it should be one person's responsibility. They should take care of it. Or even that fear that, if we share leadership, then I'm going to lose power.
Yeah, those are real concerns. I've definitely felt that time pressure myself. But the book, goes on to say that good facilitation actually saves time in the long run.
Totally.
So I'm ready to explore how they actually do it.
Okay, great. Well, they break down what they call, agile facilitation into 4 core principles, which are maintaining neutrality, standing in the storm, honoring the wisdom of the group, and holding the group's agenda.
Okay, I love it. Let's unpack those one by one. So first up, neutrality. And I'll be honest, when I think about neutrality, I'm picturing like this silent facilitator in the background, just kind of observing. But the book actually busts that myth right open.
Right. It's not about being passive. Neutrality really means being actively attentive to the process. You're asking questions that guide the group, but you're not trying to steer them toward any particular solution.
Well, that makes sense.
Yeah.
No, we've all probably seen in meetings where someone's trying to force a decision and it totally backfires and creates tension.
Yeah, they give a great example of that in the book. And it really shows how staying neutral is what builds trust and makes everyone feel safe to share their thoughts.
Okay, so we've got this neutral stance, but what happens when things get heated? Like, the book uses this really great metaphor, standing in the storm, which I think will be really helpful for dealing with conflict.
Right. It's about those moments when, tensions rise, maybe someone gets defensive, or there's an awkward silence. And, the book gives us some really practical tips for how to navigate that and stay calm in the midst of it.
Yeah, like that moment in a meeting where you can just feel there's some underlying issue simmering beneath the surface. And the book refers to these as emergent agendas, these like hidden things that can totally derail a meeting if they're not addressed.
Totally. And they share this great story about a volunteer team. And, on the surface, everything seemed to be going fine. And then, bam, all of a sudden, these underlying tensions explode. During this seemingly simple meeting, it really shows how conflict, can pop up anywhere.
Oh, I love that story. Because it's so easy to just get caught up in that presenting agenda and miss those subtle cues.
Totally.
So that actually leads us nicely to the next principle, which is honoring the wisdom of the group. And this is where things get really interesting for me.
Yeah, me too.
It's this belief that every group has a collective intelligence, this like pool of knowledge and creativity that we can tap into.
Right. And it's about trusting that the group together can find solutions, even if individuals aren't sure. It's pretty powerful.
But the book acknowledges that this can be tough for facilitators, like when you're met with silence or you doubt the group's experience. And it offers some great strategies for overcoming those hurdles.
Yeah, I think one of the simplest, but most effective is just asking the group,
Yeah.
what do they need? creating that space for all voices to be heard,
Yeah.
even the quiet ones.
Oh, yeah. That's so important. Okay, and finally, we get to the principle that kind of ties it all together, which is holding the group's agenda. And this is where the book breaks down the different levels of agenda. So you have the presenting agenda. You know the obvious one, the meeting's official purpose.
Right.
But then, as we've seen, there's these emergent agendas that can kind of sneak up on us.
Yeah, for sure.
And then there's the developmental agenda, which is, the bigger picture stuff, like the group's dynamics and how they're working together as a team. And they had this great example of a team retrospective meeting where one team member's frustration actually reveals an emergent agenda around unspoken communication assumptions.
Oh, it's such a good example.
Yeah.
It really highlights how skilled facilitators
Yeah.
can sort of juggle all three of these levels to keep the meeting on track and achieve those meaningful outcomes.
Yeah, it's like I'm imagining the facilitator
Yeah.
as like a conductor,
Yeah.
keeping the orchestra in sync, but also paying attention to the individual instruments.
Oh, that's a great analogy.
So we've unpacked these 4 core principles, which is a great foundation, but the book doesn't stop there. They dig into this concept of agile mindset, which
Right.
goes beyond just using specific tools or techniques. This is where I really started seeing the bigger picture, I think.
Yeah, totally. It's really about adopting the values and principles behind Agile,
Yeah.
not just blindly following a set of rules.
And the book warns against becoming what they call the practice police, rigidly enforcing rules without understanding the spirit behind them. They encourage us to be guardians of the values and principles instead, adapting the practices to fit the team and the situation.
Right. And there's this great story about a team that actually rejected the word Agile altogether because they had this terrible experience with this really rigid coach.
Oh, wow.
And it really shows how important it is to be adaptable
Yeah.
and really focus on the principles, not just the practices.
Yeah, that's a great story because it's so easy to get caught up in the dogma of something and lose sight of the why behind it.
Totally.
So I think that brings us nicely to this last section that we want to cover in this part, which is this focus on the facilitator's personal development.
Yeah, the inner work of facilitation.
Yes. This is where things get really interesting for me. The book really stresses self-awareness and reflection as key skills for facilitators.
Yeah, and they actually encourage facilitators
Yeah.
to develop what they call their own personal model for facilitation. And they offer a bunch of techniques for doing that, like co-facilitating, journaling, and this one that's called the left-hand column exercise.
Hold on now. For those who haven't encountered that exercise before, can you explain what it is?
Oh, yeah, totally. So it's a simple but powerful technique where you divide a page into 2 columns. On one side, you write down the objective facts
Yeah.
of a conversation. You know what was said, who said it. And then in the other column, you're jotting down your own internal thoughts and feelings as those things were happening.
Oh, that's so cool. So it's like shining a light on that inner critic that we all have.
Right.
That's constantly, giving us feedback and judgments.
Yeah. And by comparing those 2 columns, you can start to see, where your biases and your triggers might be affecting how you're interacting with the group without you even realizing it.
So it's like a personal debrief after a meeting,
Yeah.
focusing on ourselves instead of the content.
Right.
I love it. And that's just one of the techniques the book offers for facilitators to develop their skills and deepen their self-awareness.
Right. And it's all about becoming more conscious
Yeah.
of how we're showing up in these group settings and how our own inner landscape is influencing the dynamics of the room.
Yeah, I love that. So this has been such a thought-provoking conversation, and we've really only just scratched the surface of the art and science of facilitation.
Yeah, definitely.
I'm curious, what stands out to you the most so far?
I think for me, the emphasis on mindset has really struck me. It's this reminder that effective facilitation, it's an inside-out practice. It starts with understanding ourselves, our biases, and how we're impacting the group. What about you?
Totally agree. And is there a specific technique that you are personally excited to experiment with in your own work?
Yeah. The left-hand column one, I think, has me intrigued. I can see how that could be really helpful for uncovering those hidden biases and triggers that might be influencing my behavior.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, I'm fascinated by the idea of developing a personal model for facilitation. I've always just kind of approached it intuitively.
Yeah.
But I like the idea of having a more structured approach.
Yeah, that's great. And remember, this is a journey, not a destination.
Right.
Like mastering facilitation is this ongoing process of learning and growth. There's always something new to discover.
Well, on that note, I think we'll wrap up part 1 of our deep dive into the art and science of facilitation. We've laid the groundwork. With those 4 core principles, we've gotten a taste of the agile mindset. But there's so much more to explore.
Yeah, part 2, we're going to get into the practical side of things, diving into specific techniques and real-world examples from the book that you can actually apply in your own meetings. So see you there. All right, so welcome back. I think in this part, we're going to shift gears a little bit from those big picture concepts to the more practical side of facilitation. We're going to pull out some specific techniques and real-world examples from the book that you can actually use in your own work.
Okay, so we've got the foundation. Now, how do we actually put these principles into practice? I'm ready to get tactical.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that the book really emphasizes is that mastering facilitation isn't just about understanding the concepts. It's also about being aware of yourself and how you react within the group dynamic.
That makes sense. We talked about self-awareness in the last part.
Yeah.
So how do we actually become more self-aware?
Well, one of the techniques that the book recommends is journaling after each facilitation session. So you know it's a chance to reflect on what worked, what didn't, and start to spot any patterns in your own behavior.
Oh, that's interesting. It's like a debriefing session with yourself.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And, the book even suggests some specific questions to ask yourself, like, what did I notice? What was my initial reaction? And why? Is this a recurring pattern for me? What biases might I be bringing to the table?
So it's about really digging beneath the surface and understanding how our own thoughts and feelings might be shaping our actions as facilitators.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And, I think the more aware we are of our own internal landscape, the better equipped we'll be to navigate those complexities of group dynamics.
I love that. And the book also mentions that left-hand column exercise for uncovering those hidden triggers.
Oh, yeah. That's a great one. So those who aren't familiar, it's a really simple exercise where you just divide a sheet of paper into 2 columns. And on one side, you're writing down the objective facts of a conversation, so you know what was said, who said it. And then the other column, you're recording your own internal thoughts and feelings as those things were happening.
Oh my gosh, I love that. It's like holding up the mirror to our inner dialogue, that constant stream of thoughts that we often don't even realize is influencing us.
Right.
Yeah.
And by comparing those 2 columns, you can start to see
The connection.
between your internal reactions and your outward behavior.
Oh, it's such a practical tool. And you don't even have to be a facilitator to benefit from it. I think anyone who works in a collaborative setting could use this.
Absolutely. It just helps us become more conscious of our own biases and how they might be affecting our interactions with others.
So we've got journaling, left-hand column. What other techniques does the book offer?
Well, co-facilitation is another really powerful one. It's like having a built-in feedback loop and support system all rolled into one.
I've done some co-facilitation before, and it's amazing how much you can learn from having another perspective in the room.
Yeah. It's like having a second set of eyes and ears. You know someone who can. Observe those group dynamics from a different angle.
Yeah, and the book gives some great questions for co-facilitators to discuss beforehand, too. Like, how will we invite participation? How will we handle conflict? What if someone pushes back on the process? What happens if one of us gets triggered?
Having those conversations up front is so valuable. You know what aligns the co-facilitators? Creates that shared understanding and builds a sense of safety.
It allows you to support each other, learn from each other's strengths, which ultimately benefits the group.
Exactly. And, I think having 2 facilitators can also bring more diversity of thought and experience to the process as well.
Oh, yeah, that's a good point. I imagine it can also be really helpful for navigating those emergent agenda situations we talked about earlier, because sometimes one facilitator might be so focused on the main agenda that they miss those subtle cues of an underlying issue brewing.
Totally. That's where having a co-facilitator can be a total game changer. They can provide that fresh perspective and help bring those hidden agendas to the surface before the meeting gets derailed.
Yeah, it's like having a safety net, and it frees each facilitator to focus more fully on their role, knowing that they have support.
Right. So, one facilitator might be focused on observing the group dynamics, while the other one is guiding the conversation, and then they can kind of switch roles as needed. It creates a more dynamic and engaging experience for everyone.
This is making me want to find a co-facilitation buddy right away. Okay, so we've covered journaling, the left-hand column, co-facilitation. What about those times when you, as the facilitator, feel tempted to jump in with your own opinions or expertise? I know I've struggled with that.
Oh, yeah. That's a common challenge. It can be really tricky to maintain that neutrality when we have strong opinions or relevant knowledge. And the book offers this really simple but powerful solution, which is asking permission.
Permission to step out of the facilitator role.
Exactly. So instead of just launching into your thoughts, you pause and you ask the group, hey, would it be helpful if I shared my perspective on this? Or, I have some experience with this topic. Would you be interested in hearing about it?
Oh, that's so smart. It puts the choice in the group's hands and acknowledges that they're the content owners, not the facilitator.
Exactly. It honors their autonomy, and it prevents the facilitator from hijacking the conversation.
But what if the group says no?
Well, that's valuable information too.
Right.
It could mean that they're ready to find their own solutions, or that they need more time to explore the issue on their own.
And as facilitators, we need to respect that and trust the process.
Right. It's about empowering the group, not solving their problems for them.
Right. And I think this approach could also be really helpful when you're working with teams who are new to agile or unfamiliar with certain practices. Because it's tempting to just tell them what to do, but that often backfires.
You're totally right. And the book really emphasizes that we should be guardians of the values and principles, adapting the practices to fit the team's context and needs.
So it's about striking that balance between offering guidance and allowing the team to discover their own way.
Yeah. And trusting that they have the collective wisdom to figure out what works best for them.
And they tell the story about a team that had a really terrible experience with this rigid, agile coach who just dictated every step.
Right.
And it really highlights the danger of becoming, the practice police.
Right.
Enforcing rules without understanding the spirit behind them.
And that story really resonated with me. It just underscores the importance of adaptability and recognizing that agile is a mindset, not just a set of rigid rules.
Right. It's about upholding those values and principles while being flexible in how those are applied.
Exactly. And sometimes that means letting go of our own preconceived notions about how things should be done.
And the book even suggests that the agile practices themselves can be adapted and customized. They use the example of retrospectives, which, can become kind of stale and formulaic if they're not allowed to evolve.
Right. I've seen that happen. It's like going through the motions without any real reflection or learning.
Right. So how can we prevent retrospectives from becoming just another meeting on the calendar?
Well, the book recommends having an open conversation with the team about what's working, what's not, and, what do they need to make the process more valuable.
So it's about co-creating the retrospective format with the team while still honoring those core principles of reflection, learning, and continuous improvement.
Exactly. It's about finding what works best for each team in their specific context.
Yeah, and that's the beauty of agile, isn't it? It's about embracing flexibility and finding what works, rather than clinging to rigid rules.
Yeah, I think that the book's message about being guardians of the values and principles rather than practice police really struck me as a key takeaway.
It's about holding on to the essence of agile without getting bogged down in the mechanics.
Right. And ultimately, it's about empowering teams to create their own unique expressions of agile.
So we've covered a lot of ground here, exploring these practical techniques for developing our facilitation skills, from journaling and co-facilitating to handling those moments when we're tempted to share our own content.
Right. And we've seen how all of these techniques are really rooted in those core principles of agile facilitation, from maintaining neutrality to honoring the wisdom of the group.
It's been a fascinating journey so far. Before we wrap up part 2, I'm curious, is there a technique that you are particularly excited to try out in your own work?
I'm really drawn to the idea of co-facilitation. It just seems like such a powerful way to learn and grow, both for the facilitators and the group. How about for you?
Yeah. That asking permission technique really stuck with me. I can see how it would not only improve my facilitation, but also create a more respectful and collaborative dynamic.
Yeah, that's great. And, it's exciting to think about how we can apply all of these techniques to create more engaging and productive meetings.
Well, on that note, we'll wrap up part 2 of our deep dive. We've explored a range of practical techniques, and in part 3, we're going to zoom out again to look at the bigger picture. We'll delve into how facilitation can transform not just teams, but entire organizations.
It's going to be fascinating to explore that next level of impact. See you there.
Welcome back for the final part of our deep dive into the art and science of facilitation. We've covered the principles, we've explored the techniques, and now I'm so curious to see how this all plays out on like a bigger scale.
Yeah, this is where it gets really impactful. In this last section, the book kind of zooms out from individual meetings and teams, and it explores how facilitation can actually transform entire organizations.
Ooh, I'm intrigued. So we've been talking about meetings, but this is hinting at something much bigger.
Yeah, that's right. The book argues that, this shift in how we collaborate can lead to more effective decision-making, increased innovation, and even a more engaged and fulfilled workforce.
So it's not just about better meetings, it's about creating a better way of working all together.
Exactly. And the book really dives into how that shift can happen. Challenges the traditional top-down approach to leadership, where the leader kind of dictates and everyone else follows.
Oh, so moving away from that hero leader model we discussed earlier.
Exactly.
And the book seems to be advocating for a much more collaborative and empowering approach.
Absolutely. The book suggests that by focusing on dialogue and tapping into collective intelligence, organizations can unlock a whole new level of creativity and problem solving.
That makes sense. If you create a space where everyone feels safe to contribute their ideas, you're bound to come up with better solutions.
Yeah, it's not about assuming that, the leader has all the answers. It's about recognizing that the wisdom and the expertise often lie within the group as a whole.
And I love how the book actually calls conversations the core of leading sustainable change. That's a pretty bold statement.
It is. But I think it rings true. When you think about it, so much of what we do in organizations relies on communication and collaboration.
Right. Yeah. When you put it that way, it seems obvious that learning how to facilitate those conversations effectively could have a massive impact.
Yeah, for sure. And the book emphasizes, it's not just about talking for the sake of talking. It's about creating the conditions for meaningful dialogue that leads to action and results.
Okay, so what are those conditions? What does it take to create that kind of environment?
Well, the book points to several key factors. One is psychological safety. So making sure that everyone feels comfortable sharing their ideas without fear of judgment or repercussions.
Yeah, that's crucial. You can't have honest and open conversations if people are walking on eggshells.
Totally. Another key factor is clear purpose and structure. So, even though we want to embrace emergence, it's important to have a shared understanding of why are we having this conversation and what do we hope to achieve?
So it's about finding that balance between structure and flexibility.
Exactly.
We need enough structure to kind of keep things moving forward, but also enough openness to allow for new ideas to emerge.
Exactly. And of course, skilled facilitation is at the heart of it all. It's about creating that container for the conversation, asking powerful questions, and guiding the group toward meaningful outcomes.
Right. And we've talked about some of those specific techniques for doing that, like maintaining neutrality, standing in the storm, honoring the wisdom of the group.
Right. And the book reminds us,
Yeah.
Even though these techniques are important, they're not magic formulas. It takes practice and self-awareness and a willingness to continuously learn and grow as a facilitator.
I've definitely found that to be true. The more I facilitate, the more I realize how much I still have to learn.
Yeah, it's a journey, not a destination. And the book encourages us to embrace that journey and to constantly seek out opportunities to refine our skills.
I'm curious, what's your biggest takeaway from all of this? What's the one thing that's really stuck with you from the art and science of facilitation?
I think for me, it's the idea that facilitation isn't just a set of tools and techniques. It's a way of being. It's about showing up with curiosity and empathy and a genuine desire to help the group unlock their potential.
Oh, I love that. It's about shifting our mindset from telling to asking, from controlling to empowering.
Right. And the book makes such a compelling case for why this shift is so important, not just for teams, but for organizations as a whole. It paints this picture of a workplace where conversations are valued, diverse perspectives are welcomed, and decisions are made collaboratively.
That sounds like a much more engaging and fulfilling way to work. It's inspiring to think about how we can each contribute to creating that kind of environment.
And it starts with each of us. taking responsibility for our own growth as facilitators. Whether we're leading a team, facilitating a meeting, or even just engaging in everyday conversations, we can all benefit from developing these skills.
Well, the art and science of facilitation has given us so much to think about and put into practice. It's been a fascinating exploration of this really powerful practice.
And remember, it's not about achieving some kind of
Yeah.
perfect facilitator status. It's about continuously learning and experimenting and finding what works best for you and the groups that you work with.
On that note, I think we've reached the end of our deep dive. We've explored the principles, the techniques, and the transformative potential of facilitation. And I hope this journey has been as insightful for you as it has been for me.
And if there's one thing I hope you take away from this deep dive, it's this. Never underestimate the power of a well-facilitated conversation. It can spark innovation, resolve conflicts, and create lasting change.
So keep those conversations flowing, keep learning, and keep diving deep. Thanks for joining us.
Until next time. See you next time on the Facilitators Deep Dive Podcast, your podcast on your way to facilitation mastery. Until next time.
See you then.